Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Liz Krueger. I'm the state senator from the 28th district, and welcome to this webinar, whether or not you live in my district. I would like to welcome program attendees who are viewing this event on Zoom and or Facebook, or who are calling into the first session of our 2025 Virtual Older Adult Roundtable Series on the impact of federal funding cuts on older adults. This afternoon's beginning program is titled, We Can Fight Back. Learn how to advocate for what we need. And you might be an older person watching, or you might be a younger person who cares about what happens to older people and cares about our community. And so even though this is a older New Yorkers Roundtable series, everyone is always welcome. And what I learned is people learn things, even if they weren't sure this was the place for them to spend some time. As always, we have closed captioning for today's event. As a viewer, you have to activate closed captioning to view the text on your device. If you're in Zoom, click on live transcript in meeting controls to start viewing closed captioning. And if you're on Facebook Live, you'll see a setting button on the bottom right-hand corner of the video. Click on CC for closed caption to activate the process. This forum is being recorded, and everyone who RSVP'd will receive an email with a link to the event video and all the resources that are posted or discussed in the chat within a few days, along with the presenters' PowerPoints. So don't feel like you have to have a pen or paper and be scribbling madly, because that will take your attention away from being able to hear as clearly as you want to, because we're going to send it all to you afterwards. And now to move on to our event. Things seem pretty grim at the moment in time. The assaults on our democracy and on we the people are coming at a fast and furious pace. Some of us have decided to try to not watch the news or read the newspapers. I can't do that. But I have to tell you, it gets a little overwhelming late at night or first thing in the morning when you see the headlines. Hearing the news is depressing and makes us feel like we are powerless and helpless. That's partly what they want. But we are not helpless. We are not powerless. And today we're going to hear about RR1, the federal budget law that makes serious cuts to programs and services for older adults. But we will also hear about how we can fight back. There are more of us than them, and change is possible. In subsequent roundtables, we will hear specifically about the impact of cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, and important benefits like SNAP and HEAP. This afternoon, we have an incredibly knowledgeable and passionate group of speakers. Amber Christ, Managing Director of Health Advocacy in Justice and Aging. Alison Nickerson, Executive Director of LiveOn, and her staff, Kevin Kiprovski, Director of Public Policy, and Jenna Gladfelter, Director of Community Engagement and Partnership. We'll all be sharing information about the impact of the federal budget changes and how to best advocate for what we need here in New York. After each of their presentation, I'll be moderating the Q&A portion of today's event. Like at all of our events, you are welcome to submit questions in advance. I have quite a few of them, but if there's time, we'll also get to additional questions you might type in to the chat section or the Q&A, I think, actually the Q&A section while you're listening, and we'll see how many additional questions we can get to. So I'm going to kick it off by turning it over to Alison Nickerson, again, Executive Director of LiveOn New York, and her presentation on why New Yorkers need to advocate. Good afternoon, Alison.
Thank you so much, Senator Krueger. Bear with me just a second while I share my slides. Okay. Is it working? Okay, there we go. So first, I just want to really thank Senator Krueger and her team for including us and doing these incredible topics. If you're a constituent of Senator Krueger, you have a phenomenal, long time committed champion to the older people in the state of New York and to all people and to democracy on the whole. So I just so appreciate the work that she's doing. Okay, so LiveOn, if you don't know LiveOn New York, we are a membership-based nonprofit. We have roughly 130 member organizations. They run about 1,000 programs. And our work is focused on making sure that two things: the government adequately allows people and provides enough so that we can thrive in later life. And number two, that the community supports are there and have the tools that are required to meet the needs of our community. These are all of our members. There's a lot. I'm not going to go through them. We were founded in 1979 by a philanthropist, Eleanor Guggenheimer. Her picture is right there. And she said over and over again, don't get mad, get organized. And so these are some of the pictures of our history and showing older people in particular, including one of my favorites. I was there in 2008 when through Bobby Sackman, we brought thousands of letters to City Hall and overturned something pretty quickly. So that's a reminder that things can happen. Our work today is built into policy, advocacy, member service, and benefit outreach. So I want to just frame these issues really quickly. So we believe, and what we're fighting for in the state of New York, is that in the United States, no person should fear making ends meet in retirement or later life. We believe that no person should get kicked out of their home or denied care because of their age. And we believe that a fully functioning and effective society provides and prioritizes a community system, not just and not over highly medicalized and institutional work. And we believe that these systems and policies have not caught up with the fact that we're aging more than ever. So we've gone through a drastic change in our longevity in 30 years, and unfortunately, nothing else has kept pace. We also believe that New York City and New York State have enough resources, and the federal government has enough resources to fix these problems. We do not maintain a scarcity mindset. These are decisions that are being made, and we have enough to fix them. So why advocate? So this is for all people who are interested in making sure that we have dignity and we have what we need as we age. So the first thing that's really important is, and this came originally from the disability community, the concept of nothing about us without us. I turned 40 this year. In a few months, I'll be 41. I am invested, and my goal is to make sure that all of us, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, purple, have the ability to access what people need in later life. I want my kids to make sure that they can age well. I want my parents to age well. I want my cousins, my grandparents. Everyone should have the ability, no matter what, to decide what that looks like and to be part of that decision-making process. The second reason people should advocate is that there are new models of power. So things that have worked really well in the past, for example, we have a whole landscape in this country of traditional advocates, is less important at this, I shouldn't say less important, is different than it has been in the past. And one of the reasons for that is because the advocacy groups are not being heard for the powers that be, especially in DC. Similarly, many organizations are terrified that they are going to have their funding decreased, that their 501c3 status will be revoked. So there is a difference that's happening now among the more traditional ways that people have advocated. The second is that simply the squeaky wheel gets the grease. We live in a climate of extreme information all the time, and the more people who are advocating and the more people who are pushing for power, the more likely it is that those issues will succeed. The third is that every single person has agency and connections. It is so important, and Senator Krueger will tell us if this is correct. When issues become top of mind, when they normally are absent, that is very powerful. I'll give you an example. If someone is at a community board hearing, or if someone is doing a beautification and planting flowers in a neighborhood, and they keep hearing again and again and again about aging, how are we supporting older people, what are we doing about increasing rent, then those things start to get paid attention to. So everyone has the ability to bring those things up, and the more we bring them up in different places, the better we will be. Part of this also is connections. The people on this call, the constituents that are in your district, everyone knows everybody, right? New York is like a small place when you start thinking about who you know and who attends a synagogue, a church, everyone that you know in the world. Those relationships are really important right now because people know people. And so we've had folks who have called Senator Malliotakis in Staten Island who ended up knowing people who she knows. I mean, it's a very small place when you start looking district by district. So I really want to impress upon everyone that people have the ability to think about their friends, their family, their people, their acquaintances. And so when we think about why advocate, it's really to tell our story and to understand how we can be involved in decision making from every angle. The last thing I want to mention, I'm just going to check on time. I have a few minutes. What is working? So I like Senator Krueger. It is a very difficult time. We're all living through a really difficult and overwhelming. The sheer amount of information can be overwhelming, but there are certain things that are working. So we have seen in the last few months and few weeks, real congressional pushback against a housing and a health and human service budget that the president put forward. And that is what should be happening, right? Our Congress should be pushing back. They have the power of the purse. They should be pushing back. They are hearing from constituents. So we saw a congressional reaction to the housing advocacy. We have seen a congressional reaction to the HHS budget. And that means that people are listening. So that tells us that all of those phone calls, all of that outreach really, really makes a difference. The second is local reactions to advocacy. Again, I mentioned Staten Island. There are hyper local areas where it is so important for those phone calls, for those visits with the staffers, with the elected officials. And so bringing it to the local level and making sure that not only Republicans, but also Democratic congressional members hear from their local constituents, not just what's happening on the news, but how it's affecting the people in their district is so, so critical. And that's leading to some of the pushback and some of the mobilization. The third area is that there are other states. We're currently working with 20 other states across the country, including many Republican states, many purple states, many Democratic states, and older people are having these conversations in many other places. And so we're thinking about, what's working in Oklahoma, what's working in Nebraska, what is happening in Colorado. And so that's really helping us as an advocacy organization understand how to best connect the dots and how to best build on the power and the interest that a lot of older adults have in mobilizing in this time. And the fourth area of what is working is the constant message of affordability. Every Democratic governor is concerned right now with affordability. We see it across the country. And so to the extent that we can tie the issues of housing, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, LIHEAP, all the issues that Senator Krueger was talking about, those are affordability concerns, caregiving, but often older people are not part of that conversation. So we need to be having those conversations. It's not just about Medicaid, it's about affording healthcare. It's not just about affordable senior housing, it's about affording a place to live. And so those messages are resonating really well at this time. So I'm going to stop here. I hope this makes, let me stop sharing. I want to impress how important it is to have everyone's voice. And I think we're going to run through some other things coming up.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to roll it over, so to speak, to Amber Crisp, Managing Director of Health Policy at Justice and Aging. Hi, Amber.
Hi, Senator Krueger, and hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Really grateful that I was invited to participate. I'm Amber Christ. I'm the Managing Director of Health Advocacy at Justice and Aging. And for those of you who may not know Justice and Aging, we're a national legal organization, and we're working to end senior poverty by making sure older adults with limited resources can get the health care and financial security they need. And we work at the federal level, and we partner with advocates across the country And we provide tools and training and support to help bring that healthcare and financial security to older adults. And I'm here today to give you an overview of what's happening at the federal level, and particularly in Congress, that will have a significant impact on older adults in New York and across the country. And the biggest change that we're seeing is the passage of the Budget Reconciliation Act of 2025. This is also called HR 1 or One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBA. It was passed by Congress on July 3rd and signed into law on July 4th. And this law shifts money from people with the least to those with the most. It has been called one of the biggest wealth transfers in US history, and yet it is still adding $3.4 trillion to the federal deficit. And I want to give you a visual representation of what that redistribution looks like. And this visual was released by the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. And on the left of this graph, you can see that those with the lowest incomes will see their incomes decrease by 3.1%, or about $1,200 a year, while those with the highest incomes will see their incomes increase by 2.7%, or that's $13,600 a year. And the losses for the people with the least, with the lowest incomes, comes mostly from cuts to public programs like Medicaid and SNAP's food assistance. So to Allison's point about affordability, we're making things far less affordable for those that have the least resources to pay for things. And we know that most older adults are living on limited resources and will be negatively harmed by this law. The median income of older adults in 2023 across the country was $29,740. And a whopping 70% of older adults report having income below $50,000. Nationally, 15% of older adults are living in poverty based on the supplemental poverty measure, and it's higher there in New York at 16.2%. And poverty rates are higher on average for older adults of color and for older women compared to older men. And HR 1's cuts to programs that older adults rely on will hurt those living in poverty, force them into deeper poverty, and will hurt programs that help people stay out of poverty and ultimately allow people to live lives of dignity as they age. So I'm going to give you some top line impacts of HR 1, and then I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper on the details, recognizing that there's a lot of details in this bill or in this law, so we're not going to go through all of those today. So some top line changes is that the HR 1 law makes the largest cuts to Medicaid in history. They're estimating about $990 billion over 10 years will be cut. And the Congressional Budget Office estimates that in total, with the passage of HR 1, 15 million people across the country will lose health insurance coverage. That includes 7.5 million to 10 million people losing Medicaid coverage, and about 4 million people who will lose premium tax assistance that helps them buy health insurance on the marketplaces. Because at the end of this year, that enhanced tax premium assistance will expire, and HR 1 did not extend that. So unless Congress acts, we're going to see that additional assistance expire. The law also makes cuts to SNAP's food assistance, cutting it by $250 billion, and it's anticipated that 4 million people will lose SNAP coverage or have benefits reduced. And it moves up the Social Security Trust Fund insolvency date and undermines Medicare. This law is also particularly harmful for immigrants, and it will leave many lawfully present older immigrants without health insurance or food assistance. So if we focus a little bit in on some of those details, first on the healthcare side, HR 1 was not advertised as a healthcare bill and was considered a tax bill, but it made unprecedented changes and unprecedented changes to Medicaid in particular. And I just want to point out that 23% of aging adults 50 and older in New York are enrolled in Medicaid and could be impacted by these changes. So first here I have that the law makes huge cuts to federal Medicaid funding to states, shifting the amount of costs to states, and that leaves states to figure out how to make up for the loss in federal funding. And for older adults, what we're worried about is that states will turn to cutting benefits that are optional under federal law, but are really essential for the health and well-being of older adults and disabled people. So these optional benefits under federal law include things like home and community-based services. These are the services that help older adults and disabled people remain living at home rather than having to go into a nursing facility. So there in New York, that could include things like the personal care services, the New York Transition and Diversion Waiver, the People First Waiver, Community First Choice. These are all programs that help older adults and disabled people remain living in the community. Other benefits that are optional are dental, vision, and hearing. And because, again, they're optional for the state to cover under federal law, it's often what states turn to when they have to make these hard choices about what to cut, because they can't cut mandatory benefits and services. They really don't have that many levers, and so optional benefits are often on the table. States also turn to cutting eligibility expansion, so where they've gone above federal minimums to expand coverage to additional populations, increase income and asset limits, increase benefits. And we've seen that in New York. We've seen that with the older adults and people with disabilities, increasing the income and asset limits. And we've seen that with coverage of immigrants regardless of immigration status. And we know that this is going to happen. And in fact, it's already happening in New York. We saw just this week, you all announced that rolling back the basic healthcare program. It was optional for New York to expand that program up to people with higher incomes. And because of the cuts to federal funding, the state is now proposing rolling that back because it's a lever to reduce spending to fill in that budget hole for loss of the federal funding. So again, all of these are a possibility for cuts as New York kind of grapples with how to fill the budget hole from the loss of federal funding. Again, and to Alison's point, these are not inevitable. We can fight back, but they are the things that are on the table because of the loss of federal funding, because of the passage of this bill. HR 1 also fundamentally changed Medicaid by putting in place work requirements for adults on Medicaid. So now people are going to have to prove they are working or meet some sort of exemption from this requirement to maintain their healthcare coverage. And as a result of the work requirements, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that 5 million people across the country will lose coverage because of it. Not because they aren't working or not because they don't meet an exemption, but because of the red tape of having to prove those things. And this will be particularly felt by older people ages 50 to 64, who are more likely to have chronic conditions or a disability and least able to navigate the red tape. There are other changes in HR 1 that impact older adults. It rolls back rules that made it easier for older adults and disabled people to enroll and maintain their Medicaid coverage. It limits how far Medicaid will pay back after someone applies for past medical bills. It also rolls back the nursing facility staffing rule that would have required nursing facilities to have more staff and improve quality of care in nursing facilities. And like I noted in the top line, immigrants were particularly targeted in the law. The law makes it so many lawfully present immigrants who currently have coverage and are eligible will lose eligibility for Medicaid, Medicare, and the financial assistance to pay for marketplace coverage, leaving them with very few options for affordable health care or health care at all. I'll end on the healthcare points by noting that the law also triggers cuts to Medicare. Because the law resulted in such a large deficit, it triggered another law that requires Congress to make cuts to programs, including Medicare, to offset those deficits. So if Congress does not act, Medicare will be cut by about $535 billion over the next 10 years. We do anticipate that Congress will act, but again, Congress has to act to stop that. And it also just demonstrates like the irresponsibility of this law that added so much to the deficit while causing so much harm to so many people with the very least amount of resources. Like I noted, the law also makes cuts to SNAP or food assistance, cutting the federal spending to states, again, shifting the responsibility to states to come up with how they're going to fund this or make up for this loss in federal funding. And work requirements were already in place in the SNAP program prior to the law's passage, but the law makes them worse by expanding the requirements to older people ages 55 to 64. It expands them to veterans and to unhoused people. So those populations were previously excluded from the work requirements, and now they're going to be subject to them. And also, like we saw on the healthcare side, the law restricts SNAP to lawfully present immigrants who previously had eligibility, so they will lose access to assistance. The law did not make cuts to Social Security, but what it did do was provide a $6,000 tax deductions to seniors 65 and over. But a few notes about this tax deduction, and pretty consistent with what we've been talking about in terms of a theme here, is that first, the tax deduction is temporary. It's in place from 2025 until 2028, and then it will expire. It excludes disabled people on Social Security that are under the age of 65. The tax deduction does phase down for people with higher incomes. So it starts to phase down for people with incomes 75,000 and over. Keeping in mind that 70% of older adults report having income at 50,000 or below. So people who do not file taxes will not benefit from this because it is a tax deduction and it is not refundable. So many, many, many older adults will see no benefit at all from this tax deduction or very little benefit. The most benefit goes to those with more income. And notably, the tax deduction will mean that for everyone, the Social Security Trust Fund will become insolvent 1 year earlier than would happen if this tax deduction weren't put in place. So that's what's happening there with Social Security. I do want to point out that despite the name, Budget Reconciliation Act, that HR 1 isn't really the budget. Every year, Congress has to agree on federal spending for the government through the annual budget process. And they pass what are called appropriation bills, like what they're going to spend to keep the government running. And that's called discretionary spending. So that's also happening. And right now, the federal government is funded through what's called a continuing resolution. And that is set to expire on September 30th. And unless Congress puts in place another continuing resolution or some other budget agreement, the government will shut down. We're watching this process because a lot of programs that older adults rely on are funded through discretionary spending. So programs under the Older Americans Act, which includes, food delivery, it includes legal services, it includes Medicare counseling, Older Americans Act kind of funding. So we're keeping a close eye on what the budget agreement looks like, but keeping in mind that even if it's flat funding, if it's maintained from last year to this year, that practically is a cut because the need is growing, but the same pot of money is being used to serve a lot more people. But all in all, we're seeing some, I would say, better than anticipated conversations about what will be funded for Older Americans Act and other programs that support older adults for the budget process than we had anticipated earlier in the year. Nonetheless, we're keeping a close eye on that. I also want to point out that some funding that was already passed and approved by Congress in 2025 hasn't been released by this administration. That includes things like the Senior Community Service Employment Program, or CSEP. So we're dealing with both HR 1 and its impacts, but we're also still having to deal with the annual budget. I know that was a lot of information and a high level. We have some more detailed explainers and resources on the Justice and Aging website, including timelines of when provisions from HR 1 will go into effect. Things are all over the place in terms of timeline and when things become effective. So you can use that QR code to scan to our website page. I've also included some resources from national partners on HR 1 and the budget appropriations that you can use here. Some explainers about HR 1 and then 2 organizations that work heavily on the annual budget. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Senator Krueger.
Oh, thank you, and I didn't mean to cut you off by showing up. You had so much information, and all of those resources that you're listing, we're gonna make sure go out to everybody who RSVP'd, because the quantity of information about what might be happening is enormous. But that's why we were doing these things, so people have a chance to start to sort through these. Our final speakers are Kevin Kiprovski, Director of Policy, and Jenna Gladfelter, Director of Community Engagement at LiveOn New York, and they'll be talking about the cuts to older adults who are most concerned about the impact of these cuts and some of the advocacy strategies that we can take on here at the local and state level. So hi, Kevin and Jenna. I guess it's in that order that you're speaking?
Yeah, and
Okay.
I can share my screen now and get
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator, for the introduction. Okay, let me go full screen here. So hello, my name is Kevin Kiprovski. I am the Director of Public Policy for LiveOn New York. My job is to engage with elected and government officials to express the needs of aging services in New York City and New York State, and also to work with providers to understand how those needs can be executed better for everyone in the state and city. I'm going to be using a lot of examples from the state and city, but we're going to talk about ways to also engage with the federal government. The state and city examples are going to be ways to tangibly sort of understand some of the government processes. And I know that many of you are here at the senator's event, so you definitely understand sort of the way the government works, but it's always nice to have a refresher. And some people might just need a little bit of a reminder about certain things. So the first thing I want to say is sort of some of the projected impacts of these cuts. And I'm saying projected impacts because, as Amber said, not every piece of this bill goes into effect now. In fact, a lot of it goes into effect in 2026. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about is projected, meaning, there's always a chance that things can be changed and things, might get better. So the Fiscal Policy Institute is projecting $3.7 billion in shortfall for cuts for New York State. This impacts things like health and hospital programs, food assistance programs, employment programs, heat and cooling assistance programs, and affordable senior housing programs. On the city level, we don't have an exact number, but city officials have been mentioning that the state draws up to 10% of the budget from federal sources. We're going to use city programs as a concrete example of what will be affected, because I feel like it's a lot easier to understand these impacts if it's sort of as local as possible. But the cuts could affect everything from affordable and public housing, New York City's public hospital system, aging-specific programs such as senior employment, and the aging services portfolio. I'll go through what the aging services portfolio, what it is in a minute. So I'm going to talk about two key things here. One, what is LiveOn doing to fight? So how are we structuring our fight to ensure that aging service providers have the funding they need? And two, how can everyone in this call involve themselves in ensuring that your voice is heard and you are making sure that government officials are fighting for what you need? So what is the service portfolio that I'm talking about on the New York City level that could be impacted by some of these cuts? Amber mentioned the Older Americans Act that is discretionary on the federal level. That funds everything that New York City can offer to some degree. So all the older adult center in your neighborhood, any NORCs that you might know of, home delivered meals programs for you or anyone who may be homebound, case management programs, home care, GMHI, caregiving support, elder justice, and connecting folks to services. Our mandate really falls within this level of service. We don't do a lot of work on the Medicare and Medicaid side, so I don't have a lot more information on that, but the advocacy strategies, if that's your primary concern, are the same strategies across the board. So we have been meeting with older New Yorkers across the state, across the city, and we have been asking, what do people need and what are people seeing that even before or without these cuts, what should we be fighting for? A lot of the things that we've heard are affordable housing, affordable transportation, getting emergency information out there, supporting older veterans, public health, and food services. So what we've done is we've put together a framework with which to fight on sort of all levels. Our fights usually involve budget, as we can see with the Big Beautiful Bill. A lot of that is budgetary. Also with the budget negotiations happening at the federal level and at the city and the state level every year. The budget usually determines how services are going to be prioritized. Two good facts to have at your disposal for any advocacy is how much the budgets are and how much people invest in aging. New York City's budget itself is $116 billion. New York City aging is $564 million. That is less than 0.5%. The New York State budget is $254 billion, and the New York State Office for the Aging is also less than 0.5% of that. So as you're moving into these fights on the city and the state level, you should know those numbers because they are very strong conversations to have. We're really grateful that Senator Krueger is pushing forward a lot of older adult specific policies and budget priorities. She is a great advocate for this, so we're lucky to have her. But we can all join in helping her in that fight and ensuring that all of our voices are heard there. So we are fighting in this time by making sure that we're not backing down in the face of difficult times. We are actually putting forward a campaign that is demanding more investment in a time even when funding is maybe a little more questionable, because we believe that older adult services are only going to be needed more in the next coming years, regardless of the situation we find ourselves in. So we're calling on New York City and state to prioritize older adults in food, housing, and community services, because our research has shown us that those are the top three things on almost every New Yorker's mind, but especially older adults. A lot of the data that Amber showed about financial situations really means that, you know, food insecurity ends up being an issue for a lot of folks in New York. So the next part is going to be a quick civics reminder. There is going to be a bunch of slides I'm going through quickly. I'm sure that everybody knows how the levels of government work, but it's really good to understand when we're talking about advocating exactly who we're telling you to advocate to and what their roles are. So we're going to go down from the top of the federal government to our municipal government and just remind everyone sort of how many people represent you. Because by the end of this, I think everybody should know how many people they vote for, how many people they can call, and honestly, how many people they should call once this meeting is over. So first, president and executive offices. You can actually call the president's office. Right now, you know, it's a difficult time to get a lot of messages through, but it's really important that we are able to make some connections with the federal executive. Even if, you know, you feel like it's going to go nowhere, sometimes having your voice as an official statement saying that you've fought for something does matter. I think that one thing we should definitely focus on is reaching out to your House member. A lot of times, even if you know that the elected officials are ideologically aligned with you, providing a level of courage is something that really does help. I know that, you know, when I used to work in an elected official's office, we used to have people call all the time. Sometimes we would even write bills off of 2 or 3 phone calls. So it's really important to make connections with elected officials. The number one thing I hear whenever I go to meetings with these trainings is it's going to be worthless. And the number one thing I respond to that is it's not worthless, because I can tell you that if we got 6 calls on the same day, that was a big deal. That set off alarm bells in our office, and that really caused us to look into something. So, you know, it's really important that we value reaching out to these people. And for the House of Representatives, for your representative, I can also tell you a lot of people do not call their federal representatives. There is a lack of contact with constituents that I think comes from the fact that there is an expectation of the federal government that has built up over the years that actually has discouraged people from calling. So it creates a kind of vicious cycle where people expect the federal government not to respond to them. So people don't call folks in the federal government, which then makes the federal government less responsive. I would say on the federal level, at the end, I'll give you a resource where you can find contact information for every single person that represents you. So you'll be able to figure out who that is. But I would say that it's important to call your representative specifically, because on the federal level, the only other folks that you have is the Senate. And since there are only 2 senators for all 19 million New Yorkers, you can get through to their office. They do have constituent affairs people, but typically it's easier to make a connection with your House member. That being said, you should still definitely call your Senate. With a Senate, it's a numbers game. The more people who call them about an issue, the more they will be engaged and involved with that issue. And I can tell you, it does motivate elected officials, staff, and elected officials themselves if they see many people reaching out at the same time for the same thing. So this is where it comes to, if you're fighting for, if you're concerned about Medicare and Medicaid, giving a call, telling them that you're concerned, you want it to be one of their key issues, and then always asking what they're doing about it, right? I mean, this entire event today is what an elected official is doing for you about this, right? So they should be able to provide an answer like that. Are you having webinars to teach people? Are you focusing on a bill that you're trying to push? Like trying to really understand what they're working on. And you know, if they're not working on it and it's something that is of interest, this is how you get that ball rolling. You know, you make the call, you encourage your friends and family to call and really get that moving. On the federal level, I would say that it's, even though things are so, you know, complicated right now, I think we always throw the basics out the window first. When we want to engage, we always sort of try to figure out what's the most high impact, high energy thing we can do to make the biggest possible difference. But I can guarantee you the basics, calling and getting to know your elected officials, is the most high impact thing you can do. If you know who is in their office, if you know their staff, if they know who you are, if they know that you are someone who has a community behind you, if they know you are someone who has a community behind you, your voice will be, you know, elevated. And if you get your community behind you, you will have more impact in that way. So on the federal level, definitely reach out to your House member, definitely alert your senator to what your concerns are, and don't discredit it. I would actually encourage everyone after this call to look up the phone numbers and just give a quick phone call, introduce yourself, talk about the things you've learned, and really ask what their plans are. And then give them a chance to develop a plan if you know some of these things aren't on their agenda, because sometimes it really does take people showing their interest to direct the energy and attention of an office to moving to these spaces. So the next parts are all statewide. Even though a lot of the impacts we're talking about are federal, we have to realize that a lot of the funding from the federal government gets operationalized through the state. That means that a federal funding cut usually means that the state then has to figure out how they're going to work without the funding from the federal government. There are some programs the federal government runs directly, but most federal investment passes through the state to programs throughout the state. So it's also important to let, you know, the governor know. Her office, there's a bunch of different offices that function under the governor. So if you give a call and there's enough calls, it will alert people in the executive. And it's important to let them know, because as these cuts become real, the state then makes decisions on what it's going to invest in itself or what it can invest in. So it's a good way to make sure that your priorities are known, so that when decisions have to be made, your voice is part of that decision-making process. We have a similar split between the Senate and the Assembly in the state as to the House of Representatives and the Senate in the federal government. However, it's a much smaller population, so state senators are much easier to access, as you can see here, and much more responsive than federal senators. So it's very important to reach out to your state senators. If you do not live in Senator Krueger's district, the resource will help you identify who your state senator is. And to, again, relay to them what your concerns are, and importantly, ask them what their plans are in response to your concerns. Since we kind of talked about this generally, I'm going to kind of move a little more quickly through the rest of them. State Assembly mirrors the House of Representatives. You should know who represents you on a state level. And by know, I don't just mean the name. I mean, you should call someone and know someone in their office, like their constituent service liaison, if you have an issue and need to repair something, or just to make sure that they know sort of what's on the mind of your community. I think that one of the biggest things I do hear is that one of the things I do hear from folks is that they always feel like they call their state electeds and you know, their issues aren't solved. That is true. You're not going to get 100% success rate. I'll say two things though. One, if you don't make your thoughts known to them, you have a 0% success rate. And two, it's a game of numbers and community. Meaning, if you call, you really need to engage your community and your family to also call and also keep things moving in that way. Then on the city level, we have the mayor. the mayor mirrors the president's office. There's a lot of things going on with elections this year. Election years are usually even more important to let folks know what matters, because it definitely, a lot more attention gets paid during election years. So, I mean, definitely important to keep the mayor's office intact. And then New York City is unicameral. So we only have one body. We don't have a Senate and a House. We just have a city council. Again, you should definitely know your city council member. One thing I will say here, a lot of times the city council gets a little bit in these kind of conversations sidelined, because people think that it's the smallest level of government. But I would caution against that, because the city council's budget is $115 billion. That's bigger than 46 states. I think that only the New York State government, California, Florida, and Texas governments have a larger budget than New York City. So it's important to keep them in the loop on what your concerns are, because if there are funding cuts, $115 billion is a lot of money. So the city has the resources to pick up a lot of slack in emergency situations, and in situations where, they need to know what's going on. I'm also seeing people talk about, missed calls and answers. I would say at that point, that's why we live in a democracy. We all have our votes at the end of the day to make our decisions, but it is very important that we engage with the government, not only during elections, but also in the in-between too, because that's when we build the relationships that allow us to have a voice in the decision-making process. So there is a website called commoncause.org. We can send this resource out later. You put your address in, and when I put my address in, it shows me about 42 different people. The reason it shows me 42 different people is because in New York, we elect our judges. So it shows every single judge that is elected in the district that I live in. But this website will give you every person that represents you that is elected, and it will give you a contact number for them, and it'll give you their website. So I would recommend putting your address in and sort of seeing, first of all, how robust our democracy is here in New York, how many people you vote for, who those people are. If you've ever wondered what a civil court judge was and you want to know who the heck they are, you can go to their website. But also just giving a call to all of the layers that I've said. And it doesn't have to all be in one day, but it definitely is important so that they hear who you are and they know who you are. Because a democracy isn't just an election. A democracy is also engaging as a constituent with those you elect, because it's a partnership between the elected officials and the constituents, because an elected official can't act without the mandate of their people, and if the people aren't giving them things to act on, it's a difficult situation there. Okay, how do we do this? I'm going to use the New York City budget as an example model of political engagement, just because I feel like when I'm speaking about these in the abstract, it's very hard to understand how decisions matter and where they matter. The federal budget process is not on such a clean timeline, especially nowadays for like the last 15, 20 years. The city budget is a very clean timeline. So it's very easy to understand the city budget. It's very easy to understand how to impact it. The principles are the same for the state. It's and the federal government. The state also has a very clean timeline for the budget. But the city is probably the easiest to use as an example. So I'm going to go through how the city budget works so that you can sort of see how this engagement affects policy and budget. So the city budget process is 5 steps that goes from January to July 1st. That is if you want something done in the budget, the decisions will be made from January to July. Step 1, the mayor puts out a preliminary budget, a proposal. The president also does this. We are in the process of people negotiating that on the federal level. Step 2, you have council analysis and hearings based on the budget. So the legislative body, in this case, the city council, will release their counter proposal after they go through the budget, and they have hearings on sort of each subject area. For LiveOn, we testify every year at the aging council hearing, because that's where it's most relevant to us. Next is the council's formal response. They'll take their analysis, they'll take the hearing data, and they will publish a formal response. I will say every single year that we have testified, we have gotten things in that council formal response. Then the mayor will integrate the council's comments into an executive budget, which is his final budget proposal. Then between the executive budget being released and the budget adoption, you have negotiations that occur between the council and the mayor. And also you can, as a constituent, start calling and start pushing for people to do stuff. Now, how do we get engaged in that? We as LiveOn engage, and this is where we bring folks in to engage sort of in our structure. We encourage people during the analysis to give testimony so that they are on the record about what their needs are in response to the budget. We do the budget analysis, so we provide the information, and then we help people formulate their testimony. During the council's formal response, actually during steps 2, 3, and 4, we are hosting advocacy days in each borough. What's good about these advocacy days is if they're early enough, they also can pertain to the state budget. And depending on what's going on with the federal budget at the time, we've also integrated federal elected officials to make sure that everybody knows what our needs are. Everybody is welcome to come to these. Our one in Manhattan is actually our largest one, and it's at City Hall. And then that's the citywide advocacy day during the executive budget negotiations. So those are some ways that individual voices, when they come together, can really actually change how the budget response comes out, because we've been able to push the city to add millions of dollars to the city's aging system through these strategies. Now, you can always talk to us about how you can engage sort of with our specific policy areas. There are other wonderful organizations such as Justice and Aging that work more on the federal level. There are organizations like Medicaid Matters that work more on Medicaid. So there's a lot of organizations that have a lot of strategies. But I'm going to go through that sort of like 3 different settings. Wendy, yes? Oh, sorry, must have been a glitch there.
Well, actually, I'm sorry, it's Liz again. So I just wanted to note, pretty much the time is up for the presentation by both of you. And we did.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I'm sorry about that. Jenna was only going to give a quick update on the timeline for the federal policy webinar. So we are almost done. This is just the last one. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you.
But yeah, so high engagement, you can organize your community yourself. You can get folks together. You can meet with your elected officials and candidates yourself. You can show up to their office. You can call or write to press, WNYC, Gothamist. That's really high engagement. Medium engagement, testifying at council hearings. Join our advocacy events and talk to people in your network. And the lowest engagement is just staying informed, understanding who we are, understanding what we do. And Jenna, do you want to talk about the webinar?
Yeah, the last thing that I'll say is that we know that there are so many topics that also we could cover today. They're endless, like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, health, health services in general. So we hear that and we know that. And over the next couple of months, LiveOn New York is planning to host a couple of different policy webinars, which I will put in the chat here, but that is going to be on Thursday. The first one will be on Thursday, October 16th at 11 a.m. So we'll give you more information about that, but I will include this in the chat where if anyone is interested in signing up, we just want to make sure that we're bringing in some more experts on these topics that can answer more of those questions and allow some time for that.
And that's it for us. Thank you so much for the time. Sorry that I went over. Sometimes
No, you didn't actually. You ended up exactly on time. I just didn't know that Jenna only had a quick closing. And I want to thank all our speakers and invite them back on with their cameras, because now we're getting to the Q&A portion of the event. And yes, indeed, many of the questions are related to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and you just referenced you have other webinars coming up. We also have webinars coming up that will make sure to be covering those issues. So anyone who thinks they don't get their question done today, or they had lots of more things they wanted to learn about, the great news is apparently here in New York City, just among the groups on this webinar today, we're having more events that are going to be able to have you have opportunities to learn more about many of the issues that we're facing and additional things that you can do as advocates and as individuals who are watching carefully that you're getting every benefit you possibly can in a changing environment. So now we had lots of questions in advance that I mentioned, and we're going to try to get to as many as we can. If I see in the question that I'm pretty sure which one of you to ask, I might say by name, oh, maybe you have the answer. But if I don't actually, then I'm just going to say, anyone have an answer here? And my approach always with this is, okay, not everybody has every answer. What we'll try to do is get follow-up answers to people. If you play on, I call it stump the senator. It happens to me all the time. So, we will get started. If you still have questions that you want to add to the chat or the Q&A, some questions that have come in during the webinar were actually answered during the webinar because somebody looking knew and could answer. And then we're just going to start going down a fairly long list. The first one I think I'm going to take. Why are we still sending our tax money to Washington? They make their own rules. Why can't we? We need the tax funds here in New York. They reference specifically for Medicare. I'd say for a whole bunch of things. Well, I've been asked that a bunch of times as a legislator, so I'm going to tell you what I've learned. When you pay your federal taxes, it doesn't go through Albany and then to Washington. So we can't hold it up and say, nope, we're not sending it to you. We're keeping it ourselves because we need it, because there's no way legally to do it. When you pay your city taxes, they actually go to Albany, and we could hold them up, although I don't think we plan to. But that's not the same model for paying your federal taxes, either individually or in corporations. I had someone else ask me, well, can't we just ask people to voluntarily send their money to Albany instead of Washington? I have to say that's a bold proposal by any individual, because if you don't pay your federal taxes, you are facing federal liability and even criminal charges. And I certainly would never be advising anyone not to be paying their federal taxes and facing risk. I did ask the state controller whether he could open up an account for people just to put their money in if they wanted to give it to us directly. He said that wasn't really legal either. So unfortunately, elections have consequences, and this election had some really big consequences for us at the federal level. Next question. How do we join the fight? And I feel like that's what everybody's been talking about here already, how to join the fight, and the fact that there are programs and other activities that people can get involved with, and targeting who they should be reaching out to. And a lot of the resources that were referenced and will be sent to everybody go to exactly those kinds of questions. Let's see. A lot of these are, I think, the questions we already answered. Okay, hundreds of thousands of people might become homeless due to the cuts in the various federal programs. Why isn't this being discussed enough? I'm not sure that came up specifically in this webinar. Does anybody have any response?
I mean, I can add in that there are pretty robust conversations going on at the city level between HPD, Department of Social Services. A lot of the government agencies are talking and are working together. The same in the advocacy community. There's been a new coalition that started called Yes to Housing. That is both a coalition and a PAC that is to move housing policy forward in light of the step back of federal support. And, so I think this is on a lot of people's minds. And I know from our government colleagues that it is top of mind to make sure not only how in New York City, how the NYCHA world, our public housing is going to weather the storm of clawbacks on anything from Section 8 to infrastructure funding. And then also affordable senior housing has a lot of federal subsidies built in. So certainly the city and the state have been in a lot of conversations about what that looks like and how to address it. I feel very deeply. There's so much information, and every time I open the New York Times app, it's like something. It's a crushing amount of information. So I do feel like in certain spots it is very top of mind. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yes. And the next question was about concerns with the feds breaking all these laws and making all these changes, and what are we doing about it? So I thought I would just reference the fact that we have one of the more activist attorney generals in this country, Tish James, and she is leading the charge in coordination with quite a few Democratic attorney generals throughout the country to bring lawsuits against illegal actions by the Trump administration, including any number of announced cuts or just not sending the money without actually even changing the law. And these are by and large in violation of the laws that say Congress controls what programs get funded and the money being put in budgets. So you're welcome to take a look at the Attorney General's website. I had a in-person town hall a few months ago where Tish, Attorney General James, was one of my lead speakers and went into detail about how many legal challenges and fights she's taking on. And in fact, she came to the legislature during the budget and said, I need more attorneys to take on more of these cases. Can you please give me more money for more attorneys? And the legislature said yes, and put more money into her budget so that she could hire more attorneys to represent all of our interests in these challenges against federal government. But in fact, I'm quite sure she puts a lot of information about these cases on her website. So you might want to check out the Attorney General's website to get updated on some of the challenges she's been taking on. Unfortunately, there are too many courts that are now ruling in the president's favor, even when sort of asked the question, is that constitutional? And they choose not to answer and they rule in his favor. But we just have to keep pushing back. There's a question about needing new kinds of driver's licenses. And we actually did a different webinar a while ago about how to get the Real ID driver's license and why you might need it, perhaps now more than ever, since everyone's going to need to walk around with identification papers at all times. And in fact, there are a lot of New York City residents who don't have driver's licenses because we don't drive, but you can get Real ID through DMV, whether you drive or not. And Wendy is probably going to put up somewhere in chat how people can go and watch that webinar, because we had some really terrific people on that presenting what it means and what you need to do to get these new forms of ID. Okay, Social Security. And again, we're doing a Social Security SSI and SSD roundtable on November 13th. So note that many of these questions should be able to be dealt with November 13th. But let me just ask, probably Amber, because you were going over the federal, is there any storyline where somebody could be losing Social Security eligibility based on all these changes that we know have moved or are moving?
And no, shouldn't be in theory. But as we know, there's a lot of things happening at the Social Security Administration right now, in which data, they're making IT changes. They have terminated a lot of employees at Social Security offices. So all of that could result in people losing eligibility for services. Just because they can't get in contact with the office and update information and provide needed information. So that's one way. Another way is that they are making some changes, and I don't have the details on this, I don't work on Social Security, but they are thinking about rolling back changes that they had put in place about how you count income for supplemental security income, SSI. So people should keep an eye there, and can try to fight back on having that roll back. Yeah, so there are kind of those things. There were no cuts to Social Security in HR 1. In fact, the law doesn't allow them to make cuts to Social Security through that process that they used. Yeah, and if you're interested in more, we have a whole economic security section of our work that is led by Tracy Groniger, who is going to be participating in one of the roundtables. And we're also, we filed a class action lawsuit against the Social Security Administration, and have worked really closely with folks in New York and otherwise, and bringing attention to the issues there in that lawsuit.
And you mentioned this in your presentation, that the changes that they're making are potentially creating a earlier than expected crisis in funding for Social Security overall. And many of the questions are about what we all thought. Social Security was something we all paid into our whole lives in order to be eligible. So why is it being treated like a handout that the government can cut when it's supposed to be guaranteed to be there for us all? You must get those kinds of questions all the time.
Yes, exactly. And I think Social Security is one of those programs that I can't remember the numbers right now, but the census data just came out about how many people Social Security raises out of poverty. It is our strongest anti-poverty program. And so we want to maintain that strength, which is all the reason to keep fighting for it and investing in it.
And then more, I guess it's federal funding, but I think we're feeling it at the local level. They've apparently been really reducing the number of staff in Social Security offices, talking about specifically closing some offices, and they may have here in New York already, and not having nearly as many people to answer the phones. How is that having an impact already throughout the country?
Yeah, and that's part of what our lawsuit is about, is that they've really reduced the amount of staff, both at the federal level and then at the local level at Social Security offices. And then they're using AI and tech to answer questions that you can imagine sort of the hiccups there. So it really does have an impact, and it has an impact on certain populations more than others. People who have fluctuations in income, or who might not be as tech savvy and have an online account, who need to visit in person. There are just different groups of people that impacts more, and it certainly is having an impact on the program and accessing the program.
And by the way, I mean, look, AI is affecting all of our lives. Maybe some for the good, some for the bad, but the data shows it's wrong a significant percentage of the time. So my rule always for people is, if you get an answer from government that you don't think is correct, you're probably right, and you have to go keep pushing on it. So if AI is giving you an answer that you don't think is correct, you really need to push back, because of the whole model that AI is designed. It absorbs other people's information and then pops out an answer. So if it's absorbing wrong information, it's popping out wrong information to completely oversimplify tech. And so it's scary that government thinks it can just jump to models that have not been proven to be effective in giving people the right answers about their own benefits from the government. Much bigger than just Social Security, but apparently they're starting there. Okay, again, lots of questions about Medicare and Medicaid. We're doing a roundtable specific to Medicare ABCs on October 7th. And Medicare, Medicaid on October 14th. So we're going to have lots of future opportunities for you to come back online and ask questions about those. But let me just start right now. When do we think any of these changes are going into effect? And should we be expecting to learn we have been cut off of either of these benefits or are facing reduced benefit levels very soon, since it's already September 25? No one knows for sure. I'm pretty sure most of the Medicaid proposed cuts are to go into effect after the November 26 elections. And that was done intentionally.
Yeah, and so on our website, we have a timeline in one of our explainers of when all the different Medicaid provisions are going into effect. But as you said, Senator Krueger, a lot of them will not go into effect until 2026 and 2027, and that was intentional. But a bigger takeaway here is that no one should get cut off benefits without getting some sort of notice. And so it is very important to read your mail, stay up on your mail, know your rights, and appeal anything that seems wrong. And so if benefits are being cut right now, I saw earlier maybe a question around someone's food assistance being cut. That shouldn't happen without a notice and then an appeal. And really that shouldn't be happening right now either, because at least not because of HR 1, because nothing has gone into effect that way. So I think the bigger takeaway here is that people have rights. You have rights to receive notice that your benefits are changing. You have appeal rights. And if you can't advocate on behalf of yourself, to reach out to a legal services or legal advocate or some other advocate to help you with the process. It's just really important. It's impossible to keep track of all of these changes, and everybody's relying on all of these different programs. So to know all of the rules and the things that you need to do is pretty challenging and pretty daunting. And so I think it's important for people to reach out to their trusted sources to receive their assistance.
Thank you. Is that I quickly saw that note came up from someone that showed a pretty big cut in their SNAP benefits. Again, that's not a federal change at this point. It's much too early for anyone to be seeing cuts from that. But benefit levels get messed around with for a lot of different reasons. So what I recommend, whoever you were, feel free to reach out to my office and ask to talk to someone about helping to review that food stamp cut for you and why that happened. But that does not, I do not believe it has anything to do with any of the bad things the federal government is trying to do to SNAP. So just
Senator
again,
Krueger, can I
yes,
weigh in on the timeline? Because
yes,
some programs that are being affected because of the federal government are happening because money is either being held up and not released, or because it is an appropriation that is not being spent, or the contracted agency, the state, the municipality isn't getting funded. So there are a lot of things that we are seeing now. HEAP is a good example.
yes.
The employment programs are a good example that are happening. But the just to reiterate what Amber said, the big programs, Medicare, Medicaid, all the big ones, like those changes are down the pike a bit, but there's still small and pretty impactful things that we're seeing every week. I mean, things are coming out.
Exactly. Thank you. But again, SNAP, I don't believe they've done those kinds of cuts in it. And it will take a while for those to translate out. But you just raised the point about HEAP, which is an incredibly important program for people to help when they can't pay their utility bills. And we historically get $500 million a year for HEAP assistance. And we've basically been told not to count on any of it anymore. And so that's a huge issue here in the Northeast, where it gets cold in winter. And if you can't afford to pay your utility bill, you've got real problems, not to mention everyone's utility bills are going up, up, up. So yes, you are right. Some of this is already rolling out sort of for a variety of different reasons. And New York State is going to have to try to keep confronting what we do about these situations, as we know we're being hit by these cuts. All right, getting to housing. You never run out of housing issues. So, someone would like to know more about freezing rents. So there's freezing rents in the sense that we have a program called SCREE and DREE here in New York State. They're not federal, they're state, but they're called the rent freeze programs as a nickname. Those programs continue, and people should definitely be filing applications if they are above the age of, I hope I get it right, 62, maybe 65. And they're living in some kind of rent stabilized, rent regulated housing, and their rent amount is greater than a third of their income. And we still have a situation where large numbers of people who are eligible for their rents to be frozen at whatever their level paying now, not applying. This is a program where landlords don't even mind, because the landlord gets a deduction in his or her property taxes equal to the amount that he or she is not getting an increased rent from you. So everyone should be looking into whether they might be eligible for SCREE or DREE. Sometimes, and one person wrote it in today, they're just above the cutoff level of 50,000, and they're so frustrated. And I get that. And we were able to pass bills that increase the maximum income amount and still be eligible for SCREE and DREE just this year in session. But unfortunately, the Assembly did not pass the same bills. So I never like to pick on my colleagues in the legislature, but everybody who cares about screen injury, particularly if they've been told, no, you're just over the limit, or no, because you can't do this, you're not eligible. Reach out to your Assembly members, who I'm sure in New York City, by the way, are all supporting the program, but reach out to them saying, we really need this bill passed, or there's a group of bills. We need these bills for screen injury passed in the Assembly as soon as you get back in 26. Because the Senate passed them, and so I know they'll pass them again, but we need both houses to pass them, frankly, more than ever, because we can't count on the federal government for much housing assistance, so we have to figure it out ourselves. How will federal funds affect rent laws, specifically rent stabilization? The feds can't touch rent stabilization. That's the good news. In fact, shockingly, with this Supreme Court, when some landlord groups tried to go to this Supreme Court and get them to overturn our rent stabilization, rent regulation laws, the court said, nope, it's not our territory. This is a state decision. And so I'm very happy to report we have solid law when it comes to rent regulation and rent stabilization in New York. That's one thing we don't have to worry about. Now, supplemental money to help people pay their rent that's been coming from the federal government, I'd say be pretty worried about that. But they're actually being able to overturn our laws, I'm pretty confident are not going to happen. Let's see. And then people have some very detailed questions about city programs, which I don't think it's appropriate to try to answer today. What's going to happen to people in nursing homes with all of these changes? Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
I do have thoughts, but we can circle back with some more information. I think the reality is that many nursing homes are under an extreme level of stress. So we're really concerned. And there are some, like I was just talking to a colleague about the long-term care community coalition that is doing organizing with caregivers and residents who live in different institutional care settings. Many places will close. I mean, that is what, especially in rural areas. So we're very, very concerned about that.
And I'm not sure anybody asked this question, but the same is true for hospitals. People are very, very worried about particularly upstate and rural hospitals actually making the decision to have to close down. And so, we live in New York City, so we have a decent volume of hospitals, particularly in Manhattan. But imagine you live upstate New York and you have one hospital for a 4-county radius, and then it's going to close. I mean, that's sheer crisis for anyone in that whole geographic area about what they're going to do when they need emergency care or surgical care. And I know we at state government are spending quite a bit of time talking about how do we deal with that and the ramifications of that. And even though, as we said, the actual cuts haven't gone through yet, when you read national stories, particularly in some of the red, very rural states, their hospitals are already closing in anticipation of this. They're not even waiting for the cuts to happen. They're saying there's no way we can survive. And so we're sort of going to cut our losses now by just closing our doors and getting out of town fast. And that's, I think most Americans can't even imagine that situation happening to them. But here
Senator
we are.
Krueger, on
Yes.
that point, I think, like broadly speaking, you can't take $1 trillion out of healthcare and not have broad ramifications across the entire healthcare system. And so we're going to see nursing facilities closing, staffing shortages, hospitals closing, and that impacts everybody in the healthcare system, not just lower income people. And I think that is such an important point, but one that goes to the advocacy. And Kevin talked about advocating at different levels. This bill passed into law, but it doesn't have to remain law. And so at the same time that we're fighting against things at the local level, we can continue to talk to our representatives that are in Congress and tell them, no, we don't want, like, this has to go. This is really bad law and is harming us all. So I think it's important just to remember like the different levels that we're operating here is like multi, right? That there are many different levels here that we can keep advocating on, and that's empowering. I think it gives us something to fight for.
And can I add to that piece? Just because I think since we're in New York, we feel like a
Yes.
lot of the folks who are elected all do agree, but it's still important to call even if you know that they support it, because people need courage to know what they should put their neck out on. And the more people that tell them this is something I want you to put your neck out on and I have your back, it will change people's behavior. So I will say that even if you think that you have a federal elected official who is 100% backing whatever the heck you want them to back, you need to call them and you need to tell them you have their back and coming out hard and strong and what you need them to do. And again, that does make a huge difference. I would encourage everyone after this call to go into that resource, to make that phone call and to just keep doing it.
Thank you. And yes, one of the questions that came in was, that the media doesn't really seem to cover that huge numbers of Americans are coming out for demonstrations and advocacy, and that they're very frustrated that you can't even find this information. I guess this questionnaire said, unless you're watching MSNBC. And it is true. It's a real challenge right now, a much bigger discussion about what happened to independent media. Why are so many in media actually afraid to actually tell the truth? And they're being sued by the federal government for a huge amount of money when they do tell the truth. And I guess the good news for all of you who are watching us today, you've learned how to use the internet. And an enormous amount of information can be streamed through the internet. You now face the challenge, as I do, when you're getting information off of the internet, how do you make sure you're getting actual factual information? Because the internet opens up a whole new world, particularly in social media, of false information being shared, and actually false information that is intended to trigger scary reactions from people, but not actually fact-based or constructive information. So there are reliable websites for these kinds of information to be shared. My office can help people find some of that, but you're right. Use traditional newspapers and traditional television news is not what it used to be. And you have to dig in different ways for that information. But it can be found. And the fact that you've already mastered how you watch something on computer already puts you a step ahead for the next step of figuring out who is reliable, who is useful, and how to keep getting information from them. All right, it's actually 3:25. So even though there are still many, many questions, but I pointed out there are quite a few roundtables coming up where we're going to try to be able to answer those questions. I just want to close us out by thanking all our guests profusely, Alison, Amber, Jenna, and Kevin. Appreciate your being with us today. Appreciate the work your organizations are doing every day. And these groups have websites, and there's some place that you can continue to get information and updated materials. And apparently there's more roundtables that each of them already have scheduled that can go into more detail about certain of the issues you want to learn more about. I'll remind people our next two older adult roundtables will be on the topics of Medicare. The first, Medicare Parts A, B, C, and D, for those new to Medicare or consider changes during open enrollment, will be on Tuesday, October 7th, starting at 2 p.m. The second will focus on the impact of federal cuts to Medicare and Medicaid on Tuesday, October 14th, starting at 2 p.m. And as you may be aware from personal experience, getting the updated 2025-26 COVID-19 vaccine at local pharmacies has been more difficult and confusing than previous years. I want to emphasize how important it is, particularly for those of us who are older or may have higher risks from illness, that we need to get those COVID vaccines and other vaccines that our doctors recommend. Ignore Robert Kennedy, trust me. So on September 5th, Governor Hochul issued an executive order permitting pharmacists to administer COVID-19 vaccine to children and adults without a prescription, whether or not they're at high risk of severe health outcomes. This is not a mandate. No one's telling you you have to get a vaccine. However, I am emphasizing that we've had many presentations by the world's best immunologists on these illnesses and why vaccines are so important. The pharmacist may require a prescription or even to refuse to administer the vaccine altogether. That's the individual right of any given pharmacist. Guess what? Don't go to that pharmacy anymore. There are plenty of others that will have no problem providing you with the vaccines that you request. So I can't make you get a vaccine if you don't want to, and I can't make a pharmacist give you a vaccine if they don't want to, but you always will have options here in New York, I guarantee you. And on that note, did I cover everything I was supposed to cover at the end? Yes, oh no, sorry, one more thing. My office has been informed that Medicare is providing coverage of the vaccine, so don't worry, for most of us here on this call, we either have private insurance or Medicare. So they're covering vaccinations, and you don't have to worry about any surprise out-of-pocket expenses, but you could check with your insurance provider to double check that if you're not Medicare, and look for more emails from me about more information, because apparently the issue of vaccine availability is like a moving target in this country right now. With that, I want to thank again all my guests and thank all of you for participating, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Take care, everyone, and thank you all my staff for getting this done.